Hi there, students. Aside. Okay, aside is an adverb. It can also be a countable noun, but most commonly it's an adverb. Aside means to one side, to be out of the way. Please move aside so that I can come through. I set aside some food for John. Okay, so aside, to one side, apart. Sunday is a day set aside for relaxation. I put all of my worries aside and concentrated on finding a solution. Every month I put a little bit of money aside, away, in reserve. Okay, to one side. Please step aside so that I can get through. And then we can also use aside, perhaps as a preposition, meaning excluded from consideration. So all joking aside, I'm serious about this. All kidding aside, the people who are concerned, aside from the people concerned with this, okay, excluding, not taking them into account. The unusual circumstances aside, we're going to be able to resolve this, but normally aside, to one side. So you take somebody aside and you have a conversation with them. He pulled the rug aside and showed me what was underneath it. Could you put this book aside for me and I'll come back for it later? Please step aside and let these people through. He didn't want it and he pushed it aside. You could set aside money for a particular purpose. Okay, you put something aside. You don't deal with it at that present time. I'm going to leave this aside and deal with it later because there are more urgent, pressing matters. Stand aside so that the doctor can come in. When her boyfriend came into the room, she put her book aside and smiled at him. And then aside from, except from. Okay, so the weather is a problem, but aside from that, apart from that, except from that, everything is okay. Now, as a noun, an aside is a remark, either a remark that you make in a quiet voice because you don't want everyone to hear it. My friend whispered an aside to me. Or it's a remark that is not part of the main subject. So she came into the room with an impressive looking cake, and as an aside I said to my friend, but I bet it doesn't taste so good. Or an aside, a remark that's not actually part of the main thing. Okay, so an aside, and it's almost like an extra remark that's not it's not directly part of the of the main topic. So yes, this book has all sorts of recipes, and there are little asides about how making each of these dishes makes the chef feel. Okay, so an aside, a remark that's that is intended to be heard by one or two people, but not everybody. In the theatre, an aside is a remark that an actor makes, which is heard by the audience, but not by the other characters, the other people in the play. Okay, so aside as an adverb, to one side, to the side, apart, away. She set aside some money for future use, to put something in reserve. He moved aside and let her past. I stood aside to let a car go by. They have put the book aside for me. Okay, so he took me aside and told me exactly what had happened. He pushed his plate aside and made a rather unpleasant face. Okay, I pulled him aside and said, "You've got to explain what's happening to me." He put aside some savings. Okay, so to one side, you move something aside. He put his telephone aside. You take somebody aside to talk to them in private. You move aside to get out of somebody's way. You set something aside for future use that you're not going to use it now. You could brush aside or sweep aside somebody's feelings or somebody's suggestion. You reject it completely. I'm sorry to brush aside your concerns, but there's nothing I can do about it. And then okay, if you leave something aside, you finish talking about it, you put it somewhere else for maybe for another date, for later on. And then this aside, a comment as well, a comment that's not heard. So aside, kept to be used later. I've been setting aside money each month. One of the rooms was set aside as a classroom. I try to set aside a bit of time every day for exercise. Could you put these plates aside and I will pay you for them later? He stepped aside to let the lady go first. He drew me aside and explained the problem. He brushed aside all criticisms. Okay, you must put aside your pride and talk to him. Okay, so aside, this is something on one side. He brushed the objections aside. She put her glasses aside and stared at him. He threw the book aside. Okay, so aside. Let's see. Formality aside, 5 informality. I think you use absolutely anywhere. And as to origin, Old English, on sidan, literally on the side of. So this word side is it comes from way back. So aside.